as Randy has already said, my talk will concern the metaphysics of time in Hedwig Conrad-Martius. And there are two main sources for her metaphysics of time. One is a quite early text called Die Zeit, Ontologische Metaphysische Untersuchung, and it appeared in 27 and 28. And here she lays down the basic metaphysics of her conception of time, especially in regard to temporal existence. And then the second big text, it's the bigger monography on time. It's simply called Die Zeit, and it's a much later text from middle 50s or 54. And here she elaborates the metaphysical foundations of the temporal world from out of its non-temporal ground. So it's very advanced and obscure metaphysics. And I will focus on the first text because that will give us enough to chew on. So the aims of my talk are threefold. First, present and discuss Conrad-Martius' basic conception of the relationship between time, being, and existence. Then elaborate on some of the metaphysical underpinnings of time and being. And thirdly, to discuss the existential consequences of her approach with a glance, and really just a glance, to other phenomenological accounts of temporal existence. And so my reading will put emphasis on the existentialist aspects of Conrad-Martius' philosophy of time and argue that the metaphysics makes sense when viewed from an existential perspective, that is, from the perspective of finitude. So it's really about the existence, the whole metaphysical construct. So Conrad-Martius on time, being, and existence. So the first thing to note is this fundamental distinction that she makes between ontic time, or what she calls ontic time, which is the time where a being is said to exist in actuality, and phenomenal time, which is the imagined nexus of discrete instances of actual time. So the phenomenal time is what you would usually think of as the inner time consciousness. And so there's an ambivalence in the notion of temporal existence, because to exist temporally can mean to actually be there only for a moment of time, and this is what the ontic time is about. And to exist temporally could also mean to persist through an extended amount of time, which would be the phenomenal time. And what is unique about Conrad-Martius' account, I think, is that the meaning of the non-coincidence of the two aspects of temporal existence. So it's not that these are just two sides of the same coin, but they actually do not really fit together, ontic and phenomenal time. And that's why they're interesting. So Conrad-Martius then radically pulls the rug from under our experience of time with her conception of ontic time. Whereas we imagine time to be extended both into the past and the future based on a never shifting now, ontically the situation is much more precarious. According to her, it temporarily exists only for the fleeting moment in which our being is set over and against nothingness. So we do not remain in time. Instead, we exist only in punctiform actuality. And these moments of actual existence do not connect to afford us the seamless flow of time we experience. And this is necessarily so because time only ever is the actual moment which comprises the finite existence of beings. So ontic time is a movement of discrete instances of actuality. And every extension of this movement, of this moment beyond this very actuality, is by nature purely imaginary, pertaining to our capacity to remember and expect, but not to our ontic being, so the facticity of ontic time. That is, temporal being only exists as the moment in which one's existence and actual time touch, as she says, in a singular point. The presence that I experience does not properly belong to me, but rather constitutes my momentary existence coming out of nothingness and being threatened in its constant searching forth to disappear into nothingness again. So here you can also already get a sense that there's an importance to the notion of Augenblick. To authentically experience time is to trust in the safeguarding of one's own existence from moment to actual moment. So maybe a few more words on this relationship between ontic now and phenomenal now. So the ontic moment and the phenomenal moment. The momentary ontic actuality is the basis for any experience of duration. That is, time has to be in order to be experienced. So in this sense, the ontic now grounds the phenomenal now. And phenomenality is an imaginary synthesis of ontically distinct points in time. And then being appears to persist through time, when actually the being that is just past is no more in an absolute sense, ontically speaking. So ontic being carries the phenomenon of existence. And in this context, she says, die aktuelle Existenz schrumpft in eine bloße Berührung mit dem Sein zusammen. Eine Berührung mit ihm in einem einzigen Punkt. So because time does not exist before the entity exists, existence never reaches itself in time. It cannot take possession of itself in a real way, but only phenomenally through what we might call with Husserl retention and protension. In terms of ontic time, we cannot attain our own present. The idea of a living present flies in the face of the ontic situation. And so one could speak of a non-ownership of time. In the strict sense, there is no enduring time to have, experience, or appropriate. Only the ontic moments that verge on the nothingness from which they constantly search for. So, to get a sense of these metaphysics, we might ask some questions at this point. The first one is, so where does time come from? Is the creation of time distinct from that of being? So these sort of generative questions lead to the very highly speculative account which is developed in the Zeit, which is the second volume that I mentioned in the beginning, where she connects her problem with Plato's Timaeus and Aristotle's Physics, among other things. And I will not go into that discussion here. But there are other questions that we might ask. For instance, in what sense is being giving its fleeting moment or form of existence? What is the relationship between punctiform existence and time consciousness, so ontic and phenomenal time? What are past and future in the framework of this ontic presentism, how we might also call it? So, maybe to the first question, in what sense does being temporally exist? And here's one of a few longer quotes that I want to share with you. Es gibt in der Zeit keine Dimension, in der Existierendes versinken kann, sodass es gewissermaßen noch enthält, nur eben fortgerückt von der Oberfläche direkt der Gegenwärtigkeit. Ebenso gibt es in der Zeit keine Dimension, die das aus sich selbst herausgibt oder entlässt, es schon vorher enthalten, was zur Existenz werden soll und wird. Vergangenheit und Zukunft sind und bieten das in Wahrheit nicht, was sie anschaulich phänomenal zu sein und zu bieten scheinen und dem sachlichen Sinnzusammenhang nachbieten sollten. In other words, there is no ontic basis which antecedes presently existing being. At every moment, or at every new moment, being as such is wholly and completely new. So being is nothing else than this intermittent becoming. There is no duration in the sense of continuous being from moment to moment. So change is not an accident in substance, but a cessation of this being and the position of that being from one moment to the next. So what motivates this counterintuitive kind of being and time? And speaking in regard to standard issues of philosophy of time, we can think of two here, or two that I want to connect with her metaphysics, which is to conceptualize individual temporal existence and to account for the possibility of genuine change. And the spoiler here at this point, the discussion of these two problems serves to show that they can be cashed out in existential terms. So this is what I said in the beginning, that I don't think you can press Conrad-Martius metaphysics to give you very coherent answers in terms of metaphysics, but they will have another application. So first, for the problem of time and individuation. So one consequence of Conrad-Martius' conception is that there is no anonymous stream of time within which beings appear and disappear. So even though being as such is ontically punctiform, it are individual beings that exist from moment to moment, not simply the cosmos or everything. So time is the formal dimension of individual existence. Actual being takes the temporal form of momentariness. In this sense, metaphysically, one cannot abstract individual being from its time, because to be means to momentarily exist. Thus, time is individual. The history of moments of existence making up an entity are tantamount to the entity's being through time. And no two beings share the same time. But from this way of putting things, the two immediate problems arise. The first one is, doesn't there need to be a cosmic time that synchronizes these individual times? And maybe asked from the other way around, one could say, isn't the one moment of actuality shared by all beings, insofar as they exist, and doesn't this necessarily introduce an abstract notion of time? Or are the moments of actuality distinct? And if so, in what sense are they distinct? So these questions reveal difficulties of Conrad-Martius' temporal individuation. The problem, or one way to pose the problem, is we do not really know what it is about a substance, like a person or a table or whatever, that guarantees its apparent identity across distinct moments of ontic time. So one solution would be to say, well, it's the essence of the entity that underlies the existence, such that whatever exists is or remains the same whatness which determines its essential features. So the essence would be the sort of supra-temporal grounding of the sense of being. But here's another obvious problem with this solution, because is the whatness exempt from momentary existence? And against this, Conrad-Martius says that the cessation of existence entails the cessation of essence. In other words, essence alone cannot account for the persistence of identity, as it also exists momentarily with the being, or in the being, or that's another question. In other words, Conrad-Martius' philosophy of time accounts for individual temporal existence, which is not derived from an abstract or general time, but does not provide an intrinsic motivation or mechanism for the being's continued, albeit punctiform, existence. That is, it's intrinsic to the being as substance. So time is simultaneously a gift externally bestowed upon temporal beings, and it is internal, namely as the formal dimension of the individual's existence. So while there's no clear metaphysical solution, I will come back to what I take would be a tentative solution in existential terms. The second problem that one could address to Conrad-Martius' metaphysics of time is the possibility of genuine change. So in general, this possibility rests on a form of presentism. That is, only if the now moment is in a sense absolute, that is, it's not relative to past or future, can there be novelty or genuine change. And according to Conrad-Martius' form of presentism, the temporal parts of being, its past, present, and future states, do not form a whole that could be strung together in a spatial manner. In this sense, Conrad-Martius' theory of ontic time clearly accommodates the possibility of radical, momentary change in being. But there emerges a problem having to do with the distinction between partial and complete change. So this is maybe not even the problem, but one problem that one could see arising in this context. somewhat more clearly stated, it would read like this. If an entity does not exist from one moment to the next, if there is no actual being that remains in time, is there anything that can change? To answer this question, we would have to make a difference between the punctiform continuity of the temporal existence of the being as such, that is, the whole being, and the specific features of this being, so its states or properties. So the table and then the position of the table, for instance. And the problem here is that Conrad-Martius does not explicitly consider this difference in terms of the possibility of change. So can your idea of ontic time accommodate the difference between the continuity of the whole entity and that of its features? And one could say no, because each new moment means the indiscriminate temporal position of the entity. But one could also answer in the affirmative, because the newly posited entity contains, albeit indiscriminately, a new feature. So somewhat similar to the problem of individualized time, the metaphysics of time and existence do not offer a clear solution for this. For this, we have to look at the existential implications. So what's the upshot of this discussion? Neither temporal individuation nor genuine change can be explained solely in metaphysical terms. It is only when we consider the relationship between ontic time and phenomenal time that Conrad-Martius' proposal becomes, I would say, compelling. And the point of Conrad-Martius' concept of ontic time is to provide an emphatic sense of finitude as the Augenblick in which ontic and phenomenal time coincide. To know oneself to only ever exist momentarily. So this is, I think, if you try to put these two forms of time together, then this is what you will end up with. So now a few more words on phenomenal time. So the imagined or imaginative time, which is that of consciousness involving, to speak with Husserl, pretension and retention, is the time in a phenomenal sense. And it is, in a sense, the inverse of ontic time. Instead of the now moment being actual, what is actual is the future from which time comes and the past to which it passes. And the present is the mere conceptual barrier that separates, or rather connects, future and past. So the nothing out of which being originates ontically is imagined, or is, according to phenomenal time, the things past and the things to come. And what is the relationship between ontic and phenomenal time? Conrad-Martius terms their relationship as absurd, i.e. they have nothing to do with each other. Yet both concepts of time are theoretically justified. One is not reducible to the other. Ontic time is justified through the necessity that being has to be actual. And phenomenal time is justified through the nexus that necessarily constitutes itself across instances of ontic time. And to illustrate this necessity and the necessary relationship between the two, I have here a passage which is, I guess, the closest that one comes in this text to Conrad-Martius giving an example. And this is why I've included it in the talk. So, wenn die Kugel nicht im Augenblick vorher hier passiert wäre, so würde sie jetzt nicht dort passieren. Das eine geht in kontinuierlicher Seinsfolge in das andere über. Es lässt sich phänomenal ganz und gar nicht so fassen, als ob jedes neue Aktualitätsmoment aus dem Nichts herauskäme. So, phenomenal time doesn't really capture this ontic actuality. Sondern es besteht im Dauernden eine kontinuierliche Seinsfolge, die nirgends abreißt, bei der sich gerade das Vorige in dem Nächsten erhält und neu setzt. Wenn auch nun qualitativ abgewandelt. Durch die neue Seinsgestalt wird die Vergangene, die eben diese neue aus sich hervorgehen lässt, bestätigt, allerdings nunmehr als eine gewesene, weil aus der jetzt gerade gültigen Aktualität abgerückt. Sie wird, was ihre Aktualität betrifft, beiseite geschoben, um den neuen Platz zu machen. So what is the moral of this example? We cannot but perceive duration, where there is ontically uniform actuality. So there is a natural flow to phenomenal time, where one moment confirms the next one, in a synthesis, you might say. Yet the ontic facts are inherent in this flow. A discrete past state of the entity is needed to differentiate the entity now from the same entity a moment ago. So even though we don't really have a direct sort of access or givenness of this ontic situation, it does play a role in phenomenal time, foundational. So how does phenomenal time relate to actual existence? So it would seem that metaphysically the two kinds of time constitute an irresolvable dualism. But this is not strictly true. While ontic actuality does not manifest itself in phenomenal time, you cannot see the instances of actuality, only duration, it informs phenomenal time. We have a sense of the uniform actuality of our existence. And there's an existentialist import to this dualism. In the Augenblick, we have a sense of phenomenal and ontic time at once. And this is the last quote from Conrad-Martius. It's also a longer one, but I think it's also entertaining, so here it is, which describes the importance of the Augenblick. Sobald die Kreatur die Angst und Gefahr der Momentaneität, die in der konstitutiven Spannung zwischen seinem Nichtsein gründet, direkt und zeitlich überwinden will, indem sie in die Zeit hinein sich zu sichern, zu sorgen, and here she's thinking of a colleague of hers, unternimmt, baut sie im absoluten Sinne ins Leere. Jedes solche in das Zeitliche und in die Zeit hinein bauen, und es muss und kann und darf geschehen, solange das Endgültige noch nicht da ist, bleibt konstitutiv ein Provisorium, dessen Bestätigung oder Durchstreichung von Augenblick zu Augenblick Gottes Souveränität neu anheimgestellt werden muss. Denn nicht der zeitliche Bau kann und darf unsere Sicherung sein, sondern allein die Bereitschaft, Gottes Willen zu tun. Gerade das, wovor die Kreatur Angst hat, der Augenblick, ist ihre Rettung. Denn hier wird sie fort und fort vom ewigen Leben selbst geborgen. Hier ist alles möglich. Aber nur hier. So what does the momentariness of the Augenblick refer to? Does it refer to my finitude, which I grasp in this very moment? Is there, in the fleetingness of the Augenblick, an exhortation to live with the pathos of irrevocable decision concerning one's existence in accordance with the knowledge of the equally irrevocable passage towards one's death? And this does not seem to be what Conrad-Martius has in mind, as being towards death would, in her view, constitute a projection into nothingness. The Augenblick does not refer primarily to my existence, but to the very transcendence of the world opened up by it. And transcendence here means that the flow of phenomenal time is understood to rest on ontic actuality. In other words, transcendence describes the relationship in which present moments stand to each other. One moment does not pass into the other, but each one stands on the verge of nothingness before sinking into oblivion forever. So what does it mean to conceive of oneself existing in this precarious state? As shown in the quote for Conrad-Martius, this issue necessitates, or at least commands, faith in an eternal saving power that subsists beyond being and nothingness. But the more interesting route maybe would be to ask, can we conceive of a phenomenology of the moment based on this metaphysics of time without resorting to non-philosophical tropes? How can an emphatic notion of momentary existence inform phenomenal time, besides devaluing it as an empty projection? This would mean to live in the face of radical contingency. So does this translate into the idea that it could all end at every moment? Such a belief would indeed seem unbearable without the trust and hope in some sort of supernatural saving power. But there are other ways in which we can think of ontic actuality informing our sense of duration one of which I would call phenomenological presentism. And this is the sort of my conclusion, which is very, 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 very tentative suggestion as to what to do with this metaphysics and its existential implications. So what is this phenomenological presentism? Maybe we could think of it as an attitude that comprises sort of a greater attentiveness to the fact that things are at each moment anew, instead of simply persisting through time as the same objects. In Husserlian terms, this would mean a pretension that is not an expectation based on the present moment, but a sort of radical openness to the future. That is, we do not expect a specific future because we do not take the continuity of existence for granted in accordance with ontic time, remaining instead attentive to the ways in which actual being momentarily persists on its own temporal terms. So maybe you could also say it's sort of a radical questioning of our apprehending temporal objects. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Daniel. Terrific. Okay, so and I think we're doing pretty well for our time. We're on time for 10 minutes of questions. Okay, you know I have some, Daniel, but Patrick, go ahead. Patrick Eldridge first.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this presentation. This seems like a very Bergsonian position, like a strong dualism between one kind of magnitude which admits of continua and another type of magnitude which only admits of discrete elements, and trying to somehow get these two together. And dualisms in this regard, have been articulated in different ways in philosophy. But with respect to the idea of different kinds of magnitude, at this point in history, we have some changes in mathematics and set theory. Namely, we start to make a distinction between cardinality and ordinality. So questions concerning the division between punctuality versus continuity might be able to be refashioned. So what I have in mind here is that there can be a question between the intensity of a duration versus the extensity of the passage between durations. So I just wonder, I know Conrad-Martius has some background in mathematics. Has she ever approached this? Because this is quite a lacuna, for instance, in Husserl, who should have known about these kinds of mathematical quantitative issues, but it never really appeared in his writings on time, despite the strong historical link between mathematics and philosophy of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I have to admit, I'm not familiar either with these mathematical ideas, but it would be interesting to, for instance, ask how we could think of this duration that Conrad-Martius offers us, or how we could amplify or de-amplify the intensity of it. And I think, I would say that what I was trying to present here, this existential sort of take on it, would be a way to actually intensify duration, or intensify the moment, at least the moment as passing, precisely by confronting it with its ontic possibility, even though it's not a direct confrontation, because we don't, perceive this facticity in ontic terms, but we can get a sense of it, and maybe draw some other conclusions. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just telling Kimberly on page 70 of Die Zeit, Conrad-Martius refers to Reinach on the matter of ordinality and cardinality. The cardinal, what's it say there? Whatever it says there in German.
Oh God, Randy.
Cardinalität, Ordinalität.
Yeah.
Kannst du vorstellen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Reinach brings this in, and earlier Jeff's talk on the Bemerkungen is so influential and present everywhere, and so is Reinach so present in Conrad-Martius's thought. And I just thought that was cool that that's exactly what we're talking about. You know, so it's, and then for Patrick, you know, it'd be cool to like see how that squares with like contemporary mathematics of these magnitudes and stuff. It's your Q&A session, Daniel, but I thought that's so relevant that it's right there on page 70 of DCite. And I'm curious. I mean, so Sean's next in the question order, but you know, and Daniel, you and I have a relationship, so we can talk about DCite, the book, more later. But I just think that that's really interesting to approach the earlier essay, you know, and then to like keep it separate from the book, which then you can like think about later on too. It's very interesting to see the developments, the changes. Okay, you know, we can talk more about that some other time. Right.
Maybe just for the context, so you could maybe see her motivation for writing this bigger book on time because of all the lacunas that I was presenting in her metaphysics. So, but she, as I intimated, she draws on Aristotle and Plato to fill those lacunae in a very idiosyncratic way.
Yeah, and with the book on space as well. So up next, Sean, and then we have a question from Clinton as well. So Sean, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I was really fascinated by this notion of ontic time. If you'll indulge this metaphor, but I was what came to my mind was almost this like pointillist conception of time, these like dots of moments. And I was wondering what do these points consist of? Are they static snapshots? Are they differentials of some sort? Does she say anything more about what we can describe particular moments of being as, or is it just we know that they are discrete and that's kind of all we can say?
It's an interesting central question, and one that I can't really answer. I think it's fair to say that she does not have a very clear account of what this moment is in itself. Other than it is the existence of the thing.
Yeah.
So whatever the thing is, as it actually exists, that is that moment. And there's a tendency when you read the text to think of it, as you say, as sort of snapshots or as like frame stills that follow one after the other. But then we have to remember that it's not really ours to even describe it in phenomenal terms, because phenomenality is foreign, in its whole to ontic time. So in this sense, we would have to be careful not to conflate this actual now with the ontic now, that with the phenomenal now that we talk about, because the phenomenal now moment is equally problematic. Is it speech is present? Is it extended, or is it just sort of this very short point in time and so on? So unfortunately, I don't have a clear answer for you, but I think it's also an interesting question. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next Clinton, and then John Montani.
Hi everyone, thanks Danielle. You had a couple of slides, or I guess the one slide that mentioned the relation between the divine and I guess both ontic time and phenomenal time. I was just wondering, not insofar as there would be a question about the necessity of commitment to the divine being within the philosophical system, but more about the way in which the thought of the relation to the divine helps spell out what the concept of time is supposed to be in the first place, just at the level of the concept. Like other figures in history philosophy, for example, Spinoza has a thesis about the ideality of time as in relation to the imagination, and then there's a different kind of order that goes with the order of reason, which is that order through which the substance unfolds itself, which is not temporal but still structured, ordered. And then there's a question about how does the one relate to the other, the ordering, the two kinds of ordering, one temporal through imagination, the other one rational, and then there's some thesis that the rational one grounds the ideal one, and maybe lots of people have this kind of position. I guess insofar as, and this maybe goes back a little bit to Patrick's question, insofar as Conrad-Martius is thinking of ontical time as specifically discontinuous and in some way, at least relatively independent, momentary, the differentiation of the elements are, there's a kind of independence to them at some level. When you move to the deeper level of the explanation of their existence in relation to the divine, is it really right to think that their discontinuity or differentiation at the level of ontic is incompatible with a deeper continuum that would be the divine order, which would ground or explain ontic time? So you'd have a kind of phenomenal continuity of time for phenomenal time, a middle layer which is theorized as discrete for maybe physical purposes or the physics of time at one level, but then if the deeper ground is again continuous, and what it would mean for God itself to be discrete or have discrete in any sense real parts rather than be a continuum. To the extent that she does root the concept, or at least shows that it's compatible with the grounding relation to the divine, does she have a three-layer position then, which would allow for the explanation of discrete ontical time in terms of a deeper continuum that wouldn't be phenomenal in the top-level sense, but would still have features that might be structurally parallel to it? I'm sorry that was a long question, but I hope it made sense. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it actually refers to the second half of the text that I was discussing, where she goes a little more into the idea of eternity and the relationship between eternity and this ontic time. And I guess you could say that there's this three-layered approach, but she is really careful to keep God out of any sort of temporality. So she really, for her, I think it's fair to say eternity is not another form of time. It's just what, keeps everything sort of together. And so I guess one point or one reason why she invokes God in this moment of existential despair is because this is when we get a sense of this eternity, which is even beyond absolutely distinct from the ontic time. So there would be this relationship, but one could say, I guess, more about the relationship as she spells it out between ontic time and eternity. But I don't have it prepared right now, but you should really consult the text if you are interested, because she does go into that detail. Yeah.
So we 20 seconds and 20 seconds.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Daniel. Fascinating presentation.
Can you hear John okay?
Can you hear me?
Barely, but go ahead.
I'll come closer. So, fascinating presentation. I don't know many people to defend a punctiform, discontinuous time like this, but I do know one. Gaston Bachelard wrote a book called The Intuition of the Instant, where he defends a theory of time strikingly similar to Conrad-Martius. In that book, he argues that it's not the continuity of life that needs to be understood, but the discontinuity of birth. So that kind of emphasis on discontinuity in birth leads me to this question of how Conrad-Martius or you understand the relationship between time and life, or time and birth and death. You were talking about finitude, so I guess that was like an underlying question. Does she make a distinction between life and time, or are these things thought together? Thank you.
Well, as I said in the presentation, so one way to put it would be that she considers time to be a dimension of existence. So to exist is to be in time, but there's no, to go to this Bachelard example, there's no specific moment that she singles out, like the moment of birth or the moment of prospective death and so on, that would actually structure or give a more classical existentialist shape to this suggestion of hers. So, yeah, it's a very, I mean, there's very sort of, as I said, time is the dimension of existence, but apart from that, there's no overarching idea on how time informs life in its different forms, for instance, so between human and animal life or so on. But you could, I guess, you could use her to think towards that direction.
Okay, I have it, and I'll go ahead and scroll as you read.
Okay, thank you very much, and sorry for all that trouble.
Yeah, so next we have Irene Breuer. Did I do it okay? Breuer. Okay.
As you wish.
You can call me Dible or whatever, it's all good. And her title is Hedwig Conrad-Martius, The Real Reality of the Sensuous Appearance versus the Unreality of the Artwork. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Randy, and thank you very much all of you for having me here and for the possibility to present my paper online. And I have to excuse myself because I'm recovering from my bronchitis, so my voice is not at all stable or clear. That's why I hope that with the aid of my paper you will be able to follow my presentation. So I begin by a short introduction. In her article, the Realität des Kunstwerkes, first published in 1938, Conrad-Martius delves into the question of the artistic representation of the real reality of the world, which basically concerns the classical distinction between art and nature. In this connection, Conrad-Martius clearly rejects idealism and the concomitant assumption that an artwork imitates the living reality of nature. She clearly distinguishes between the task of phenomenology and that of art. While phenomenology should surpass the sphere of mere sensuous appearances and inquire into the real reality, wirkliche Wirklichkeit of the world, phenomenological aesthetics should conversely deal with the expressive character of appearances and assume their inherent irreality, such that phenomenological ontology and aesthetics involve distinctive ontological realms that vary according to the subject matter. However, while she clearly distances herself from Husserl's phenomenology in her search for the consciousness-independent facticity of the world, she concurs with him in her eidetic inquiries and in the assertion of the creative potential of art, which lies in the creation of a new, even a real world. For this purpose, I will explore confluences and divergences between their respective conceptions. Come to the first point, the reality of the senses appearance. Conrad-Martius neither rejects Husserl's abstention from judgment regarding the existence of a given reality, the epoche, nor the eidetic reduction. Rather, in her investigations into the autonomy of Dasein, Conrad-Martius develops her own conception of the transcendental reduction. For Conrad-Martius, the self-presentation of a structure as an appearance is directly related to the self-announcement of the phenomenon of reality. The essence of this structure is not only that it presents itself as an appearance or phenomenon as in Husserl, but also that it indicates the independent existence of an object. While an appearance is what makes that object knowable, conversely, the material entity immediately behind the appearance is something that, by being, also shows itself and shows itself as what it is. This is a central thesis of Conrad-Martius' entire real ontology, as James Hart rightly remarks. In contrast to Husserl's phenomenology, according to which real being can only appear to consciousness as an adumbration given with inadequate evidence, Conrad-Martius takes the view that real reality, wirkliche Wirklichkeit in its essence, can be grasped as a real bearer of a substratum or materiality existing in itself. Conrad-Martius revises and expands Husserl's correlation in such a way that what is thought relates to a reality that is independent of consciousness. Even though this expansion of the intentional correlation also characterizes her aesthetics, she concurs with Husserl on the fictionalizing character of aesthetic experience, insofar as it involves the creation of an irreal or arbitrary quasi-world in Husserl's terms, in contrast to Husserl, the aesthetic lived experience. Husserl's lecture course on Hauptstücke aus der Phenomenologie und der Theorie der Erkenntnis, which was delivered at the University of Göttingen during winter semester 1904-05, contains detailed analysis of fantasy and image consciousness. According to a note of Husserl's diary of the 25th September 1906, these lectures are based on ready-to-print, elaborated treatises from the year 1898 and a selection of materials concerning his work on fantasy and image consciousness were assembled by Edith Stein when she was Husserl's assistant in 1917. Despite the preliminary character, these texts constitute a rich trove of phenomenological analysis and offer fertile soil not only to his later writings, but, as we may suggest, also to Conrad-Martius' own reflections. In his above-mentioned writings, assembled under the title Fantasy, Image, Consciousness, and Memory, published in 2005 in translation, Husserl discusses aesthetic experience in the analysis of the aesthetic artistic features of image consciousness and fantasy. In a text of probably 1906, the aesthetic attitude is defined as the interest in the appearance, and this is contrasted with the interest in the subject characteristic of objective apprehension. As he explains around 1918, this is because aesthetic interest aims at the presented object in the how of its presentedness, without interest in its existence itself. In the aesthetic attitude, as Husserl emphasizes in a text of around 1917, we are neither interested in reality or in the depictiveness. It is rather a matter of imagining in the sense of perceptual fantasy understood as immediate imagination. Hence, in the fictionalizing experience, in the attitude in which we are immersed in the image, the world of experience is suspended. What art offers us is an infinite wealth of perceptual fictions, because the worlds of fantasy are absolutely free worlds. Husserl refers to the possibility to create a world, that is, to accept the quasi-reality and to dispense of any predelineation by means of quasi-experiences with a fixed content and fixed thesis. While empirical experience prescribes this world itself, the quasi-world is also indeterminate in infinitely many ways, to that extent it is precisely like the real world beyond my actual experience. But what alone can more precisely determine this quasi-world is unrestricted. It is free and restricted only inasmuch as it must correspond to the essential style of a world horizon. This is possible in infinitely many ways and at one's pleasure. Consequently, the horizon of indeterminacy is not a horizon that could be preconfigured by means of memories and expectations. What is peculiar to these worlds of fantasy is their unconditioned arbitrariness. On the one hand, this arbitrariness consists in the fact that the fantasy that determines this quasi-world is only restricted to the essential style of its horizon for the sake of harmony. But on the other hand, arbitrariness implies that the person fantasizing can creatively reshape, can create even new worlds, or even recreate a given world that is in conflict with the one fashioned previously. Counterpoint Conrad-Martius aesthetics. In contrast to Husserl, Conrad-Martius holds a more nuanced position regarding the fictionalizing character of art, insofar as art's approach to reality is dependent on the artistic style in question on the one hand, and on the function of light and colors on the other. In this connection, Conrad-Martius' own inquiries on aesthetics can be traced back to her article Colors, a chapter from Real Ontology, Farben, ein Kapitel aus der Realontologie, published in Husserl's Jahrbuch in 1929. This issue is closely connected with her writings on light, written 1938. However, her main contribution to the subject are her reflections dating back to 1938, as published in 1962 in the Festschrift für Zeitmacher, and later on 1965 in her Schriften zur Philosophie under the title The Irreality of the Artwork, das ist die Irrealität des Kunstwerkes. In general, while in the former Conrad-Martius distances herself from Husserl by inquiring into the essential real ontological constitutional place of colors, and accordingly, by claiming that sensual phenomena manifest the in itself of the real world through light and colors, and the latter, her views approach those of Husserl's with respect to the arbitrariness and the essential freedom of the artwork as to what it concerns its connection to reality. Regarding the aesthetic function of colors and light, which we cannot extensively deal with here, in an article on color. Yes, do you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
it's okay now.
And there was an echo. I don't know. Okay, I start again the sentence. Regarding the aesthetic function of colors and light, which we cannot extensively deal with here, in her article on colors, she inquires into the ontic place of the constitution of colorfulness, which she claims is a character of luminosity itself. On her view, colorfulness is a light phenomenon that is constituted by its function of revelation, insofar as with self-transcendence and becoming light, the entity in question enters the phenomenon or surface dimension. Sensuous phenomena are thus an immediate expression of the face of the real world, which is directly and as such manifested through light and colors. A manifestation that amounts to the self-transcendence and self-giving of the world. In her words, sensuous phenomena are manifestation phenomena. It lies in the sense and essence of sensual givenness to raise the ontic in itself to the level of phenomenality, to make the ontic relations on which it is based knowable and manifest through itself. However, this phenomenon of self-transcendence is not simple, but rather double, insofar as it also involves the self-transcendence and self-giving of light itself into colored light. In this connection, she recurs to Goethe's theory of colors, die Farbenlehre, in order to determine the anti-constitutional source point of the emergence of color. In his words, in Goethe's words, light and darkness, brightness and obscurity, or light and its absence, are necessary to the production of color. In the wake of Goethe, Conrad-Martius observes that colorfulness arises ontically and constitutionally by a kind of marriage of light and darkness, involving a tension between the self-transcendence of revelatory light and the self-confinement and self-preservation, Selbstbeschließung und Selbstbewahrung of darkness, Finsternis. These forces or dynamic relations constituting the phenomenon express more than a mere phenomenal surface. In a possible allusion to Husserl, she claims that far from being dissolved into a heap of mere sensations, in the phenomenon itself lies directly the deep dimension of real grounding world, eine real begründende Welt, that is an ontic in itself, that is uncancelable, undurchstreichbar. Accordingly, she defines in the same terms she employed in 1916 the task of real ontology as the uncovering of this phenomenally given ontic in itself. Hence, even though Conrad-Martius adheres to eidetic analysis, these transcendent phenomena towards what objectively lies in the specific nature of the substance. With explicit reference to Wilhelm Schaap, she emphasizes that as far as the material structure of the entity in question and its own construction surfaces or enters the face of the object, it expresses itself in the phenomenal or in light-transformed face. She says, we see not only whether the butter is yellow or white, but also whether it is hard or soft, melting or solid. This is the main thesis of Schaap's dissertation, which he wrote under the supervision of Husserl at Göttingen in 1909, and published a year after under the title Beiträge zur Phänomenologie der Wahrnehmung. Therein he claimed that color, movement, and form give us, whether by the way they appear or by the way they are represented in the sensuous appearance, an immediate insight into the inner structure and composition of the things. But Conrad-Martius distances himself from Schaap by claiming that if colors have expressive value in themselves, it is only because they express something of the essence of the things in which they appear. These late views agree with those of both her essay on colors of 1929 and her real ontology. In her essay, she concludes that the sensuous givenness of manifestation, and especially the visible, that which is grounding in itself, as begründet an sich, lies open before us and bears witness to itself. It remains what it says about itself, that is, it announces itself in its essence. Light, to which she devotes an article entitled Light and Spirit, Licht und Geist, in 1938, is that what redeems the material world from its inherent darkness and helps reality to show itself in its effective actuality. Light, she claims, is nothing other than a procreative, revealing power that works on the substance, which in turn is the mother soil that conceives the light. It is the central light of cognition in its union with reality in its objective and subjective self-manifestation that what endows reality with sensual illumination and makes it thus manifest for the eye self. Conrad-Martius claims that if colors have expressive value in themselves, it is only because they express something of the essence of the things in which they appear. So she opposes to Schaap's and to Goethe's naturalism. These late views agree with those of both her essay on colors of 1929 and her real ontology. In her essay, she concludes that the sensuous givenness of manifestation, and especially the visible, that which is grounded in itself, lies open before us and bears witness of itself. I repeat, it remains what it says about itself, that is, it announces itself in its essence. I come to her main article on aesthetics. It bears the name of the irreality of the artwork. In her article, The Irreality of the Artwork, Conrad-Martius resumes her reflections on Goethe. Here she delves into the question of the artistic representation of the real reality of the world, which basically concerns the classical distinction between art and nature. In this connection, Conrad-Martius clearly rejects idealism and the concomitant assumption that an artwork imitates the living reality of nature. Referring to Oscar Wilde's book Das Prometheus-Symbol from Shakespeare to Goethe, published in 1932, Schiele observes that in his later views of art, Goethe placed the greatest value on a strict demarcation between art and nature and condemned the desire expressed in Rousseau's Pygmalion for a naturalistic vivification of artistic forms as a degradation of art. In the age of idealism, namely, it was commonly assumed that nature's accidental and stained character should be redeemed by the purity and ideality of the work of art. For Conrad-Martius, it was not seen, really, according to her, that the ideal, the logos-like, rests in the bound and unredeemed essence of the things themselves. The work of art does not fit into natural reality. It is from essentially different stuff. Actually, the often commented argument about the polar opposition between the rigidness and lifelessness of inorganic material and the vividness and animation of the represented prevents us from recognizing that it is only by intertwining in mutual strong tension that art achieves to represent a sensuous appearance, not for the sake of this appearance, but in its spiritual substantiality. This is the proper fruitful moment of artistic effect, as called Theodor, whom she refers to as emphasizes in his article Die Darstellung der Fläche of 1921. On Theodor's view, namely, only when the surface as such unfolds its own life, independently of the content of the representation, does the tension between the two worlds become vivid and fruitful. Conrad-Martius rejects this view, which she reduces to a tension between objective reality and the artwork. She argues that the genuine work of art is a whole and one, and that our task is to find the particular place of being from which this unity arises. Since the object of representation is born as representation, this interweaving of reality and irreality, or the imitation of nature and absence of nature, refers only to the sphere of representation itself, where the two threads of a substantial or phenomenal conception of the object as grasped by the artist cross in the most intimate organic interpretation. Hence, art does not deal with objective reality, but explicitly with objects as represented. She therefore clearly distinguishes between the task of phenomenology and that of art. While phenomenology should surpass the sphere of mere sensuous appearances and inquire into the real reality of the world, phenomenological aesthetics should conversely deal with the expressive character of appearances and assume their inherent reality. Sorry, Randy, how many minutes have I left?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 5 more minutes of reading in order to allow for 10 minutes of Q&A.
So then I will skip then to the last part.
Okay.
So please skip to page 7. So in the aforementioned reflections, I pursue her connection to Wölfflin because she refers more to Wölfflin's conception of art than to Husserl's. But what Conrad-Martius agrees with Husserl, or eigentlich, well, sorry, I read because I'm having a few lines fever, but I'll skip to the paper. However, Conrad-Martius, I said, follows Wölfflin rather than Husserl by arguing that true arts concern pre-entanglement of reality and irreality, of proximity to and withdrawal from reality. They meet in the mode of representation, which in connection with the simple imitation of the real makes up the formal nodal point of the artwork. And in Wölfflin's wake, I'm reading the next paragraph, Conrad-Martius observes that impressionistic art wrongly assumed that reality should not be grasped in its own real grounding, but in its momentary appearing surface, as if the appearance would not represent reality as it is in itself. This is the aim of realism, which endeavors to grasp reality in its material grounding. At this point, it is important to remark that Conrad-Martius' inquiry into aesthetics is driven by the same motive she pursues in her phenomenological research, how to account for the real reality of the world. Art, in contrast to ontological concerns into facticity, lives from the entanglement of reality and irreality, insofar as the reality of being, the Seinswirklichkeit, appears in itself in the appearance. So, hence, I would come to the essences of art. Hence, even though both realistic and I'm reading up the paragraph. Hence, even though both realistic and impressionistic art grasp material reality, they do so according to a different average of being, a Seinsdurchschnitt. Insofar as the former depicts reality in its objective appearance, while the latter conceals its motives by submerging them into aerial atmospheres of changing light. In this way, the work of art represents nature in the real or in the phenomenal sense, that is always in the character of irreality. And then the intuitive determination of this average has the effect of disclosing the essence of beings in their immediate transparency. This transparency makes the essence of the thing, which is represented in the artwork, immediately apparent. Hence, what characterizes formally a work of art is not the fact of something being represented, but the moment of being represented, Moment des Dargestelltseins, that lies in the work itself. The work of art arises not from the natural rootedness of its feature, that is, from its imitation, but from mere representation, since the basic view of mere representation is inseparable from the work of art. Hence, art does not imitate the real. On the contrary, is the moment of reality woven into the representation itself that allows for its pure being represented. This moment of irreality is the key feature of the artwork, since it makes clear that the appearance does not arise out of the depth of its own being, but only and solely out of the medium of representation itself, which constitutes its own place of being, Seinstelle. So, I'm coming to the concluding remarks. The last page, please. Page 10. In conclusion, for Conrad-Martius, the specific task of art is to transfigure reality, which amounts to the senseless revelation of its essence, which in turn roots in the essential primal grounds of being. This defines the deepest truth of art and its ethical impact. Neither the mere imitation of nature nor pure fantastic succeed in grasping the essence of reality. In her conclusion, she claims, in the wake of Goethe, that the creative potential of art lies in the possibility of recognizing the essence of things through their visible manifestations. This is also the aim of real ontology. Intentionality penetrates the property of a substance transcending consciousness, a substance that is grasped in its essence. Conrad-Martius deserves merit for recognizing the need of transcending into the world's and art's being in itself in order to grasp the real reality, which is nonetheless given to us only as phenomenon and in its essence. Precisely her extensive research into these latter realms can be considered as one of her main contributions to phenomenology. In any event, her rich philosophical inquiries are not restricted to ontology, but also encompass the realm of metaphysics, which are thus made fruitful for the former. Here, in her pursuit of the essence of things, of beings, Conrad-Martius concurs with the core of Husserlian Hegel phenomenology. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very cool. So I'll take other people's questions than my own first. Okay, can I just say then that it sounds so much like Merleau-Ponty in like the aesthetic essays. And I know he refers to her in Phenomenology of Perception briefly in a footnote as well. So that makes sense. John Montaigne.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. I really hope to read it in its entirety. I just have one question regarding the status of representation. It seems like this plays a very important role in the intertwining or interweaving of reality and unreality, but I'm trying to understand how to think of representation in a non-imitative character, because that seemed to be a very strong thesis that art does not imitate reality. So is there a way of conceiving representation here that is not imitative?
Yes, thank you. It's a very appropriate question. Yes, and it goes really into the essence of what she considers to be the aesthetic objects. It is, it participates in the real, but not imitative. It's not an Abbildung. It's not the participation in the sense of real Abbildung, but it's more like I would say, like pistis, that it grasps the essence of the thing, it represents the essence of the things, but not the appearances of things. That is, it does not represent the surface of the things as they appear in reality, but what does it represent is the essence of the thing. It can appear in a real atmosphere, for example. When she deals with Impressionistic art, she really says that the Impressionistic art really grasps the essence of the world, because it gives, it represents its main features without copying, without abbilden, without being a truthful copy of reality. Because it represents essential traits, for example, the atmosphere, the undulating lights, the bright colors. the real affective atmosphere that reality shows. That's why it's not real representation in classical terms, but it's a representation of the essence of the things. What are the characteristic traits?
Thank you, that's very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, next we have Andrea.
I wanted to add something also very important that I could not read in the paper. And when it comes to this essence of the things, she's very clear to distinguish it from the essence of the things in the world. The essence, when she describes the way of getting at this essence, she says this essence is only but a fleeting moment of reality. That means it depends on how we momentarily grasp the essence of a thing, and it's not, this is a momentarily grasp, a momentarily showing of some particular traits of reality. Art does not represent the whole essential traits of reality, but operates through a selection of what the artist wants to show. And this is a momentarily and also, I would say, provisional Seinsdurchschnitt, sie hier appells that. That is a provisional cut through the essence of the thing. Yes, it depends on the moment or of the time and on the characters which are selected. Which essence are we going to represent? And this has nothing to do with the eidetic variation in the sense of Husserl's, but more on the momentarily grasp of some essential traits that are then essential to be represented. That's why, and also she also says, in accordance with, you say, Rodney, with Merleau-Ponty, that the art or everything that appears to us is already bearing essence. So it does not need the constituting work of consciousness to provide a sense, because everything that we grasp in reality is already embarked with sense. So we are certainly parallels with Merleau-Ponty.
Thank you. Yeah, Andrea?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hello, thank you very much, Irene. I really enjoy your presentation. I was wondering if you think it would be useful to disambiguate the notion of reality here, because on the one hand, you're absolutely right in depicting, the distinction between being a fictum and being a real in a sense of like a natural, mundane objects. So we have to maintain this distinction, but reality can be understood in the sense of actuality, so in the sense of being, like being as existence and then being true, kind of a theoretical attitude. But it can also, be understood, something is really so, right? It's truly so. And this is a characteristic of every correlates of reason, for instance, if you use Husserl. So the one that is truly existing, the one that is truly beautiful, the one that is truly good, right? So in a kind of aesthetic attitude, this idea that, in aesthetic attitude, we capture an essence that is not an ideal, an ideality, but we capture, the object as it truly is, as it is in according to its own character, has to do with a different notion of reality, which is not existence and being a theoretical attitude, but capture something, that pertains really to the objects. Right, and this is kind of a powerful thing, because my aesthetic judgment is not about my appreciation of the object, but the possibility of apprehending something that truly pertains to the object that I consider truly beautiful, truly aesthetically pleasant in its own right.
Yes, it does not mean that it's capturing the essence is it's an arbitrary essence. It does not mean that it can. This is Seinsdurchschnitt. It doesn't mean that that the essence does not pertain to the object. It's only a selection of essential traits. It truly depicts, or it truly represents the object. It pertains to to the object truly. But it's not the product of an eidetic variation. So these characters are not permanent, you say. These are not something that, in essence, that prevails, like in the Aristotelian sense. These essence have contingent features in the sense, not that it pertains sometimes yes and sometimes no, that are contingent in that sense, but they are contingent in the sense that they are taken as a selection which may vary according to the aesthetic wish or aesthetic will of the artist. That art proceeds by a selection of these essential traits that belong to the object, but are subjectively chosen for the sake of art. So it's quite a different positioning, a different positing of what truly is the essence of a thing. Yes, while in ontology or she approaches more Husserl in the sense of she applies the eidetic variation. She agrees with that, and on art. That is not the essential point of the essence. It's not a product of an essential variation, but from a momentarily Seinsdurchschnitt. She's very clear about that. So it does not have to do with the objective traits of the object, which are truly these. They are truly these, but they are subjectively chosen. And subjectively chosen for the sake of representation. That's the difference.
Thank you so much.
Very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry for my voice and my miscalculation of the time. Randy, if you want to distribute my paper so that everybody can follow it, please. I would be happy.
Okay, I will. After I
Thank you very
talk.
much.
All right, thank you. So up next.
Up next, it is my pleasure to introduce Randy Dible, Communications Officer of the North American Society for Early Phenomenology and Editorial Assistant of our journal, Phenomenological Investigations, to round off our Hedwig Conrad-Martius session.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm just going to jump into it and read my main text. So what I circulated earlier is like a supplementary sort of thing. Sorry, let me just grab my tab. Okay. Yeah, so I'm not going to read all of this, but I'll just read it straight from the beginning here. And so the other document, the thing that I circulated, it's not my translations, it's Google Translate. It's a really rough sort of thing, just like so that we can see what I'm talking about when I refer to how ubiquitous this concept of Versunkenheit is in Conrad-Martius and all of its variations and stuff. So that'll become more interesting and useful as I go. But let me contextualize it with my main text. The title is Theodor Conrad and Hedwig Conrad-Martius on Versunkenheit, Psychological, Transcendental, and Ontological Phenomenology of Immersion. And I apologize, I intended to put pictures of these folks because this is such an opportunity to share pictures of them together, as well as my favorite diagram by Conrad-Martius, but okay, I'm not going to do that. Recent work, Solius Geniusis, 2020, 2022, and some other texts as well, especially him, on the phenomenology of immersion or absorption, Versunkenheit, draws upon contributions to phenomenological psychology made by Edmund Husserl, Eugen Fink, and Theodor Conrad. The study of immersion is, for the most part, motivated by the emergence of new technologies, such as video games and virtual reality, and tomorrow we will get those Apple goggles. It's very exciting. But that does not mean that we will only find the phenomenon of immersion in such technologies. One might say we are immersed in the real reality before we are immersed in a virtual reality. What is this primary immersion and what are its consequences? To answer this question, the answer to this question can be found throughout the philosophy of Hedwig Conrad-Martius, and especially in her ultimate project called Universal Ontology. As an aside, by the way, with Daniel Neumann, very recently I got to air my Universal Ontology presentation, so that'll be coming out in the New Voices series on YouTube through Paderborn. So if you want to know more about Universal Ontology, which I'll be speaking about from a distance here today, keep your eyes peeled. Phenomenological psychology finds the theme of immersion or absorption in familiar phenomena, such as waking consciousness and dream consciousness, and in the pervasive idea of the unconscious. In Husserliana 42, Grenzprobleme der Phenomenologie, Husserl identifies in absorption a limitation of the static and genetic phenomenological methods, and in that text, he also initiates a path toward a constructive or reconstructive phenomenology. Fink contributes substantial development to this new path as well. For both Husserl and Fink, this new method, called reconstructive phenomenology, offers a path from the regressive or reflexive methods of transcendental phenomenology to a new phenomenological metaphysics. But Conrad-Martius circumvented that path through the ontology of reality. This ontology of reality, also called real ontology, could be thought of as the dilation of the static eidetic method into an ecstatic, instatic phenomenology. This is my innovative twist that I came up with very late last night. The instatic, and she also calls it infrastatic aspect, is immersion. And it is this which becomes both the self-returning dynamism constitutive of selfhood, on the one hand, and on the other hand, it becomes more concrete, and eventually even becomes what she calls the transcendental concrete of a somehow already dynamic a priori, prima materia. That's how she puts it in her book Die Zeit. We might better preserve this real ontological sense of Versunkenheit and its synonyms with the choice of the term sunkenness. Theodor Conrad was also a phenomenological realist, but his phenomenology of immersion was more psychological than ontological. At the very least, comparison of a theme so important to both philosophers should be pursued, and this could prove valuable to both contemporary philosophy of technology, like virtual reality and so on, as well as even to this project of universal ontology, which is, for Conrad-Martius, an unfinished project, and for us, a very important project to pick up, especially as there is more Conrad-Martius available to us in translation, and more people are thinking about Conrad-Martius. We might even build on our familiarity with Heidegger, right? And the landscape may change. That's what we do here at NASEP. We change the landscape in favor of Conrad-Martius and against Heidegger. Theodor Conrad's 1968 book on the essence doctrine of psychic life and experience, zur Wesenslehre des psychischen Lebens und Erlebens, is an extensive meditation on the theme of absorption, but from a kind of phenomenological psychology, different from that of Husserl and Fink. Theodor Conrad was a nephew of Theodor Lipps, whose academic association for psychology at the University of Munich provided many students to study under Husserl at the University of Göttingen, including both Theodor Conrad and Hedwig Conrad-Martius, who were married in 1912. While Conrad-Martius was prolific, Theodor Conrad published only very little, and his mature work did not come out until 2 years after Conrad-Martius's death and 1 year before Conrad himself died. Conrad uses the concept of absorption in psychic life to elucidate how a spiritual grasping in the perception and imagination of the real external world constitutes an inner psychical objective reality. This sense of absorption is psychological, but it also indicates an ontological position that can be found especially well developed in the philosophy of Hedwig Conrad-Martius. Conrad-Martius's phenomenological metaphysics includes its own contributions to psychology, but it is worked out in many disciplines throughout numerous dedicated developments in such diverse theoretical fields as theoretical physics and cosmology, evolutionary and genetic biology, and so on. Many different interesting developments over the decades. And in a phenomenological real and universal ontology in which sunkenness plays an important role. In this broader sense of the term, sunkenness refers to one of two transphysical dynamical modes of real being: hyletic, or material, and pneumatic, or spiritual, substantiality. The dynamism of hyletic substantiality is sunken into itself, self-bearing, passive to the active dynamism of the spirit's radiation and elevation. Conrad-Martius's phenomenological dynamic metaphysics offers a unique supplementation to the study of immersion in reality and virtuality that brings in central elements of romantic philosophy of nature, Hindu and Buddhist ontology, and pre-Socratic and Neoplatonic cosmology. These topics might not be found in Theodor Conrad's 1968 work, but they will be found to be in sympathy with it. Conrad-Martius's sense of absorption offers possibilities that go beyond phenomenological psychology. There is hyletic substantiality in the real external world, in inner psychic life, in non-human worlds, in cosmological and cosmogonic forces, and in many other domains. These possible senses of absorption might prove to be relevant as we seek out new technologies of experience that could expand the frontiers of reality, such as artificial intelligence, mixed reality, psychedelics, and flotation tanks. I mention these things in this way because I trust that what we think of now as virtual reality, our children playing Roblox and Minecraft, is going to be incredibly transformed very soon, especially given AI-generated images and the potential for really being immersed, fooled, and just taken into virtuality in new ways. So I think we're at an interesting point, but that's sort of an aside. In any case, for the project of universal ontology, this stuff is important. My point being that these technologies could in fact help universal ontology, could in fact help the project of philosophy going forward into the future. Dreams, fantasies, and memories are classically understood to be displacements of the ordinary waking state of consciousness, which has always been the standard paradigm of the real world and the general sense of reality. But that paradigm has been slowly shifting as technological and cultural revolutions disillusion us on the one hand, and on the other hand disclose that there is more to experience and more to reality than we once thought there was. We will need to develop our map of universal ontology if we hope to expand our sense of reality and push the frontiers of conscious experience. Okay, I call it introduction, sinking in. Here we are, in the midst of everything, already profoundly immersed. Immersion could be such a primordial fact as this, but there also seems to be room enough to allow for the possibility of a primordial coming into being, and a primordial going out. Or at least there seems to be room enough for the possibility of entertaining limits of immersion, elevation, escape, radiation, abstention, holding back, and re-entry. We can have it all in our imagination, but only some of these are real possibilities for the reality we actually experience. Reality is something we are immersed within, but this is a limited immersion. Most scientific activity is performed under the spell of the natural attitude, but in the case of phenomenology, where the natural attitude is bracketed, the spell is broken. The progression from ideation to reduction offers a method for breaking that spell, and the promise of breaking through to the objectivity and universality of facts, essences, and meaningful structures of all sorts, real, immanent, and transcendent. The revolution of phenomenological method holds the essential promise of universal science and the unity of scientific disciplines. When the phenomenological reduction is applied, no matter what to, a kind of meditative absorption takes hold and something emerges, whether as transcendentally purified immanent structures of meaning in a science of consciousness, or as the metaphysics of reality from the physical to the cosmic or even deeper levels of objectivity. For example, Conrad-Martius' various investigations in light of objective spirit, so-called spiritual revelation of higher and deeper actualization of potentialities, etc. And also the work on light that we were just hearing about. Certainly the famous phenomenological schism makes evident at least two paths issuing from the general idea of phenomenological scientific philosophy. And for the footnote, by the way, one should check out DeSantis's very recent work on method versus science, and Heffernan, back there, 2016, and Parker, 2021, all of these being very good on that schism. It could be argued that whatever path issues from phenomenology, metaphysical insight results, and the results coalesce to a deepening of the reality of spirit and matter in the midst of which we find ourselves. With phenomenology, we find ourselves in the spirit of certainty on the solid ground of objectivity. With this spirit and ground to guide and orient us, we can confidently face forward and upward to the unthought of possibilities of the realities to come, and the sublime magnitude of the reality containing them all. Whatever our opinions about the world might be, and whatever our metaphysical beliefs, reality truly does exist, and there are not only objective structures in ordinary reality, but also in dreams, fantasies, abstract thoughts, liminal experiences, and in higher order facts about those things. All these realms call for inclusion in a sense of coordination and placement that doesn't yet exist in ordinary science. Answering this call has been the aim of phenomenology as the thesis universalis essendi, universal science of being. This universal science is what we find especially well developed in the philosophy of Hedwig Conrad-Martius. A little Theodor Conrad. Theodor Conrad begins his 1968 book on the essence doctrine of psychic life and experience by swerving to avoid the Brentanian reduction of psychic life to representation and intentionality in the form of consciousness of something. Reality and my experience of reality are both real, and both possess objectivity, not a mere echo of objectivity. If we reduce experience to consciousness of an object, Conrad writes, then the whole wealth, quote, then the whole wealth of psychic life and experience would be lost. He continues, all that would remain would be a monotonous sequence of consciousness of A, consciousness of B, consciousness of C, etc. Psychic life would be uniform and inwardly empty, end quote. The colorful abundance of inner psychic life would be lost, Conrad continues, inner self-reflection, levels of meaning, egoic impulses, activities, and positions would all be lost in this attitude. Adhering to Brentano's position would seem to lead to an emptying of meaning and flattening of experience. I'm paraphrasing what he says in the opening pages of that work. Then Conrad emphasizes an important point. What would be lost in this case would be the reality and objectivity of inner life. And that would have been just as real, which would have been just as real and objective as the real external world. Our phrases like subjective experience, psychic phenomena, and only for the ego carry this reductive attitude and imply that our inner life is merely subjective, a fictitious fantasy, mere appearance and apparition. You get the gist. But psychic life is real, both for the subject in itself and projected outward, and also independent of the subject as it is meaningfully encountered in the reality of the external world. What would the external world be without its relevance for me? I find both my psychic life and the infinite fund of meaning from which it arises within and without. This fund is itself a reality greater than and encompassing my own reality, independent of me, omnipresent, and connected to my every experience. The extensiveness of external reality could be thought of as the formal referend radiated from me as the center of reference and orientation, but also as gravitational fields drawing the world toward me and drawing me out of myself. Maybe I'm being a little flamboyant, but you get what I mean. And these are categories I'm trying to invoke that she works with, like gravity and so on, matter. Every psychic experience represents an objective occurrence in the inner realm of the ego, i.e. in psychic life, and stands in itself on its own ground, independent of me, in its own reality. In contrast to this, writes Conrad, what is merely imagined is dependent on me for its occurrence. I can voluntarily stop its occurrence or evoke it. When I conjure an imaginary object, it merely floats before me. In contrast, a real object is encountered as anchored and sunken into objective reality. I'm stopping with Conrad there just because this is the first iteration of this paper, and there's maybe more to be said, but at least one can get the gist of Theodor Conrad's work, and in fact it starts to sound a lot more and more like Conrad-Martius, like a psychology of the very Conrad-Martius style. So anyway, there's probably important differences and stuff, but there's more scholarly attention needs to come to this stuff. Part 2, Hedwig Conrad-Martius. And I am somewhat okay on time, right? We're going to do lunch at 2:10, which is about 20 minutes from now.
10 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, 10 more minutes of reading and 10 more minutes of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Having briefly illustrated the realism of Theodor Conrad's position regarding objectivity within early phenomenological psychology, I will now invite us to leap through Conrad's sense of objectivity and from the inner world to the outer world. This move was plainly evident to Conrad in the work of his wife, Hedwig Conrad-Martius. Conrad-Martius's phenomenological ontology of reality is tied to her own distinctive kind of phenomenological reduction called the real ontological reduction. And this is what I'm going to give you now. In 2019, Hans Rainer Sepp published a collection of essays called Natur und Kosmos, Entwürfe der frühen Phenomenologie. How'd I do, George? In that volume, Rodney Parker provided Conrad-Martius's very early text, Über Ontologie. This text is a reaction to the kind of idealism expressed in Husserl's Ideas 1, especially section 49, absolute consciousness as the residuum after the annihilation of the world. But it also gives us an early formulation of Conrad-Martius's signature realistic method, which she calls the real ontological reduction. In this text, she distinguishes 3 phenomenological attitudes and reductions. 1. The epistemologically oriented phenomenological bracketing of the world thesis. This is the attitude by which the phenomenologist actively suspends the natural attitude about the world's positive reality, what we call thetic positing, by a noetic act, so that its pure appearance can hover or float as an epistemologically purified, transcendental version of the world. This is known as the transcendental reduction, the phenomenological reduction in a narrow sense. 2. The eidetic reduction is the phenomenological epoche, the phenomenological reduction in a general sense. Through ideation, the essence is itself freed from the flux of experience, and a certain apodicticity is secured. But there is always a remaining excess that transcends this scientific activity. This excess is the result of an intentional myopia, the apparent blind spot of transcendental phenomenology. Here, the epistemological question of the correlation between factual data and noematic being is neutrally set aside. 3. The problem presented by the epistemologically purified transcendental version of the world is, in the immanence of absolute consciousness, is the problem of how it got there originally, how it connects to reality, including its own reality, and this motivates the 3rd attitude and reduction, the real ontological. Conrad-Martius's unique contribution to phenomenological method is the polar opposite of the first, the transcendental attitude and reduction. In this 3rd reduction, In this third reduction, the general thesis of the reality of the world is neither set aside neutrally nor negated, but fully and actively, positively activated. In the real ontological attitude and reduction, the world is assumed to be factually real, whether it actually exists or not. She writes, in this pre-existing framework, which Hart, James G. Hart, calls a heuristic context, which I find helpful in understanding what that means, everything is seen, as it were, growing out or elevating itself from the real framework in which it participates. Here, the real being of the world is hypothetically posited, and things shine forth in their real being and in their self-rootedness, whether they are real in the primary physical sense, dreamed, imagined, or hallucinated. Pure ontic research, that is the ontologically essential exploration of the real world, necessitates this reduction. The first of these reductions, we might suggest, sees the shimmering ideality of the noetic on the surface of the sea of meaning. The second reduction draws it out, mines the noiric. It's noeric, but it's also like oniric, so the noiric is how I'm pronouncing it. This is from Neoplatonism, this third element, right? The noiric sea, and explores its many regions. The third discovers the depth of the noema. The real ontological reduction pushes the thing into its full stature, into its self-standing, independently real character. Okay, got that? So that was the 1, 2, 3 of these reductions that help explain what the real ontological reduction is, and then my flowery metaphor of the sea, because it's a paper on immersion, right? And we're in San Diego. And next, we're going to characterize it, the same thing, in a slightly different fashion. This methodological projection is not only a species of phenomenological reduction, but also something quite accessible. It is a kind of thought experiment that Conrad-Martius refers to as a mental experiment. Conrad-Martius' student Eberhard Ave La Lamont points to Woody Allen's 1985 film, The Purple Rose of Cairo, in order to illustrate how Conrad-Martius' ontology works. In this film, a character named Cecilia continually goes to see a film within the film called The Purple Rose of Cairo, longing to escape from her life. A character in the film, an archaeologist named Tom, eventually notices Cecilia and steps out of the film and into the audience, breaking the fourth wall and into Cecilia's life. And also goes from a black and white film into a color movie. We could also add Edwin Abbott's classic novel, Flatland, to this list, and we might even see our own lives fit in this list. The meta-theatrical example of breaking the fourth wall not only emphasizes but activates the leaping forth that not only characterizes but constitutes real being in Conrad-Martius' ontology of reality. In the context of a meditation upon immersion or absorption, it should be noted that this leaping forth or positing of the real is the opposite of immersion or absorption, but it is also the same dynamic from the opposite direction. Sinking, Versenkung, there's all these terms here, right? Sinking and rising as ontological dynamics, she calls them the rising and sinking dynamisms at one point, she refers to them a lot, are the two ways of seeing the original movement into being in Conrad-Martius' philosophy.
2 minutes.
Cool. Conrad-Martius' central dynamism also leads beyond the philosophy of nature to philosophical cosmology and universal ontology. And to see the generalities of Conrad-Martius' universal ontological doctrine, let us look at a few instances of sunkenness in Conrad-Martius' final works. And so I'm just going to pull up the other thing. Maybe I'll talk about it for a second, but then that'll be it. So where did it go? One moment. Oh, there it is. So here's the thing I sent to you all. You see it. Oh, okay, there it is. So it's a very long document. I just like collected all the instances of the term, for example, in first of all Theodor Conrad's work, because this is what Solius Geniusis sees as being the early phenomenological precedent to the phenomenology of absorption that he continues using Schutz and James and so many other figures from other areas than phenomenology as well. But I just wanted to share this with you so that you could see these instances, how it's used, a little context. And then also I did something similar with just a couple works, because obviously this would take a long time to go through all the works, right? But so I just focused on a few, and then I kept like getting excited and doing another one or whatever. So here's a long list of all sorts of usages of the term, and then here's a bunch of books, with the context for these terms. You get the idea. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes, and Rob's our first question asker.
Thank you for that excellent paper, Randy.
Thanks.
Okay, quick two-sentence question. Your concept of sunkenness sounds very similar to Merleau-Ponty's concept of depth. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how they are distinct or how they are indebted to one another.
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought, this sounds just like Merleau-Ponty.
Yeah.
That's something really interesting to think about. I mean, she also writes a lot about depth. It goes right along with the sunkenness, of course. She has this whole essay called Der Tiefe und Untiefe, and one might want to translate that the depth and the surface, but this word Untiefe, she has like a very interesting little explanation in Der Raum about those words with that prefix, and reminds us that this is like coming from like, a Bohmian theosophy where the Ungrund is such an important category, and so when she talks about like the counter space or whatever, it's kind of like Rudolf Steiner talking about the fourth dimension, the fourth spatial dimension as eternity, just like it is in Conrad-Martius. So it's really interesting to note the connections to Merleau-Ponty, and I think that's it. That's my response.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Patrick, Chad, and maybe Michael, if there's time.
Hi, thank you. As long as you can call you Rodney, I'm very sorry.
Okay, you always call me Rodney. Happy birthday, Rodney, by the way, 2 days ago.
Yeah. Just referring back to Theodor Conrad's work, it's been a while since I've read it. It's a great little book. I'm glad to talk about it, or glad that you're talking about it. But Versunkenheit, if I remember correctly, is really a function of this Erleben rather than Leben, in the sense that you have intentionality and then you have apperception or inner consciousness or metacognition or whatever it is you want to call it, right? And so this notion of absorption is a particular feature of it's the apperceptive quality of the way I'm executing my intentionality. And this can be modalized, like, phenomenological reduction, being taken out of the moment, all these things, can have these like distantiation, alienation kind of effects.
Right.
So I just wonder, given how realist Hedwig Conrad-Martius's orientation is, whether or not this matter of sunkenness is also equally a feature of apperception. Because one of the key features of, and this may be going to be a shot fired, but one of the key features of these more realist oriented phenomenologists is that everything's about intentionality and nothing is really about inner consciousness, inner time consciousness or apperception. And at least in Conrad, Versunkenheit geht Erlebnis and not about intentionality. So I just wonder if there's a parallel in Hedwig Conrad-Martius, and if so, is this a function of apperception or something different?
Yeah, thank you for voicing that question in a very articulate manner, because I couldn't have done that actually on this topic. Like I am getting it largely through Solius Geniusis. I have the document as well in our shuttle in my van, and I have a bunch of Conrad-Martius, but you know, I haven't fully translated it for my own consumption. I use the, you know, augmented reality. But yeah, so I don't know, I want to go this way, so I appreciate your framing it this way. Certainly displaced experience is like how Theodor Conrad is framing things. And you know, I'm curious whether for Conrad-Martius, the similar, or the analogous move would be to, maybe it's the same thing, like there's displacement, but then I feel like she has more places available. Like for example, as Daniel was pointing out, like there's a difference between this earlier work and this later work. In the later work, there's more of like a heavenly realm articulated with what we could call a real mythology and real theology in Conrad-Martius' style. So there's like more places that the irreal can occupy. But as Irene pointed out, you know, this there's like a place of being, right, where each of these things have their proper place. And I know that, like, right, Irene, maybe that an artwork and a fantasy are not the same place, like they're different places, maybe they're similar. I don't know, these are the kinds of things that I'm wondering about as well. You know, because like I want to focus on Conrad-Martius's cosmology, because this is like a component of the universal ontology. It has an ontology of everything, right? She has all these lists of all the categories of things, and they all have a place. So even like logical, categorical, syntactical, like purified, empty intentions and all that weird stuff can have a place in relation to this experience that we're having, and that's really cool. So I don't know. What do you think? Oh, I'm sorry. We have the audio all.
Are we never minding the question period?
Oh, well, no. We better mind the question period actually. Yeah. Okay.
We'll discuss it privately.
Oh, there you are. You can speak for a moment. Yeah.
Yes, no, I said that exactly in the static experience, it's what this fictionalizing character comes onto the surface, because she doesn't speak of reflecting or representing the real essence of the things, but she speaks of the Körpergesicht, that was the real appearance, the real appearing thing. So she's more interested in the fictionalizing experience, in the sense that it does not to reflect the reality of the thing in itself, but the characters which we choose from this reality. And we can poetically reformulate what we choose, just as impressionistic art does. So she says the art can be both naturally and fantastic, be both characteristics, illusionistic even, she says. So I think that exactly in the aesthetic experience is the place for this fictionalizing experience or for fantasies or imaginations. They have their proper place in aesthetics.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Terrific. Yeah. That's what I was wondering.
Chad, 40 seconds.
40 seconds.
So, immersion is, of course, a topic of interest in science these days, largely in, I think, engineering for like group VR headsets and such. And they have a really hard time making it work, largely because the rootedness of our bodies and our environments, our physical environments, is really hard to make work with visual inputs that in a way that doesn't make you nauseated, right? So this means that immersion is an achievement that is carried out with our bodies and the way in which the environment stimulates our bodies and also our conscious experiences. And so I kind of lost track of why immersion became relevant
Yeah, and you know, there was another aspect I didn't even quite get to, I intended to. She has this ether theory, her philosophy of nature, her real ontology as philosophy of nature, which is how Jim Hart puts it, has these categories, and we're immersed in the ether. I know this is different than like, but it was somewhere I wanted to go because we are literally immersed, you know, physically in light and air and all that stuff, but for her it's also in ether, which is this other primordial category. It's very exciting stuff. But maybe we can hear another question or
Michael? Nah.
No, only my question is variation on Patrick's, honestly. Those would be much the same kind of question.
Awesome. We'll just thank Randy. All right. Now the idea is to make up some time here over lunch. Come back at 3 o'clock. We highly recommend the Mercado right there. They have a salad bar and a hot bar and everything. Start, 3 p.m.
3 o'clock.
Thank you. Online people know whatever the next hour is in your time zone.